What if I told you that a simple barbecue invitation could unlock the very meaning of culture itself? Well, today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to deconstruct what culture really means and see how getting that right can totally challenge our ideas of what it means to be civilized.
What can we bring? I mean, it seems like such a simple, polite question, right? But believe it or not, hidden inside that one little phrase is a whole complex system of unwritten rules, shared history, and symbolic meaning. It's kind of like the blueprint of culture. So, how does one sentence reveal so much? Well, it all starts with a camping trip.
So the story behind that quote actually begins out in the South African bushveld. Just an ordinary day, a new neighbor pulls up to the campsite next to us. And this simple, friendly little moment, well, it turned out to be the perfect example of how culture works in our everyday lives.
So we introduced ourselves, and in true South African fashion, we invited them to a braai, which is our version of a barbecue. And it was their immediate response, that simple question, that really got me thinking about all the invisible forces that guide us in these little interactions. And this brings us right to the heart of it. What actually makes a response culturally correct? I mean, how did this couple, thousands of miles from their home, somehow know the unwritten rules of a South African braai? Well, the answer is in the very nature of culture itself.
So, let's look at the anthropological definition. Culture isn't just about art or traditions. It's this entire learned, shared, and symbolic system that a group of people uses to pretty much navigate the world. You can think of it as a shared toolkit for survival and for understanding each other.
We can actually break this big idea down into four essential parts. And as we go through each one, you'll see how that one simple braai invitation is a perfect illustration of every single component.
Okay, first up, culture is learned. This isn't something we're born with. It's a process that anthropologists call enculturation. Just think about how you learned to stand in a line, or say please and thank you. We just absorb these rules from our family and society, a lot of the time without even realizing we're doing it. The Austrian couple knew to offer something because they too had been enculturated with very similar rules of hospitality back home.
Second, culture is shared. The shared playbook is basically what makes society possible. It lets us predict how other people are going to act, which saves us from constant confusion. The fact that the Austrian couple not only understood the custom, but even brought Wurst, which is a local sausage, it shows they had tapped into this shared cultural knowledge, and it made the whole interaction totally seamless. And this leads us to our third point, which is that culture is symbolic. A braai is so much more than just cooking food over a fire. In South Africa, a nation that was literally built on overcoming division, the act of sharing a fire and a meal has become this really powerful symbol of unity. The fire, the food, the gathering, it all carries a much deeper meaning. As the researcher Neely put it, what we eat reflects our lifestyles, cultures, preferences, and beliefs. Food isn't just fuel, it's a part of our identity. It's a story that gets passed down through generations. And when a cultural practice is this deeply woven into who we are, it becomes more than just a symbol. It becomes a way of life. And this is really the final piece of the puzzle. Culture is like the operating system for our reality. It's the shared framework that organizes our world and gives it meaning, telling us what's important, what's right, and basically how things work. So if every culture is its own complete and valid way of life, what happens when we start trying to rank them? This is where understanding culture becomes absolutely crucial, because it lets us deconstruct some really dangerous and outdated ideas about human progress and evolution. Our thinking about this has had its own evolution, actually. It all started about 200 years ago with Darwin's theory of natural selection in biology. But then, in the late 19th century, some early anthropologists misapplied this idea to societies, creating this idea of a single ladder of progress. It wasn't until the 1930s that this was seriously challenged, which eventually led to the much more nuanced view we have today. So here's the core difference. On the left, you have unilinear theory, which imagined this one single ladder that all societies had to climb, from primitive all the way up to civilized. But multilinear theory, on the right, sees it more like a branching tree. Every culture evolves along its own unique path, shaped by its own history and its own environment. And the consequences of that ladder thinking, man, they were devastating. It was totally ethnocentric, using one culture as the yardstick for everyone else.
This led directly to harmful stereotyping, it was used to scientifically justify racism, and it gave a moral excuse for colonialism and the exploitation of entire communities that were labeled less civilized.
So why does this history lesson matter today? Well, because echoes of this linear thinking still exist in our language. I mean, just think about the terms first world and third world. What are we really saying when we use them? Terms like first world carry that same old baggage, that idea of a ladder with a single Western goal at the top. They automatically create a ranking system. That's why today we prefer terms like global north and global south. They describe geographic and economic realities without slapping a value judgment on them. Okay, so let's bring these two big ideas together. How does a simple barbecue help us understand this newer, non-linear way of seeing the world? Well, it all comes back to a concept called cultural relativism. The modern approach is called cultural relativism, and at its core, it's the idea that we should try to understand a culture on its own terms, not by constantly comparing it to our own. It's about recognizing that there isn't one single ladder of progress, but countless unique journeys that have shaped every society on Earth. And that Braai, it's the perfect little example of this in action. You had two groups from totally different continents who connected. They didn't need to decide whose culture was more advanced. Instead, they found common ground by respecting a shared symbol and participating in a local way of life, and it bridged their cultural differences for an evening. So I'll leave you with this. If we can find this deep, complex web of meaning in something as simple as a barbecue, what else are we missing? The unwritten rules of a braai, reciprocity, sharing, respect, they're kind of a blueprint. The real question is, how can we apply that same blueprint to build bridges in our much larger, much more complicated world?